To the next commentary about some films here. A couple of interesting ones. 3:10 to Yuma and Cape Fear, you're saying that both of those films, the remakes, were much better than the originals.
I'd say they were 1,000 times better than the originals. I mean, they were that much better. I mean, you know, I actually listed Cape Fear as one of, you know, I don't think it's a stretch to say it's one of the 10 best films ever made. The remake, it's just absolutely rivetingly brilliant. And, you know, there are real issues in there. And one of the things that I thought was so genius about the film, I have a friend, his name's Mark Carita, and his dad's a doctor, you know, surgeon in a hospital. And he watched the movie Cape Fear, and his dad actually admitted he was rooting for, not Nick Nolte, but he was rooting for Robert De Niro, the bad guy in the film, not the guy who's supposed to be the hero. And that was what Scorsese was trying to get us to do without making it appear like that's what he's trying to get us to do. You know, it was just absolutely genius the way he put that film together to where, you know, to him, Scorsese, you know, when he read the first draft of the script, he said, the only character I find, you know, the script here is the only character I find interesting at all is Max Cady, the villain. You know, but he took that, and the thing is Max is a bad guy. He really is a villain. In a way, he is the villain of the story, but at the same time, he's also the victim and the villain both. And Scorsese played upon that rather well, and it was interesting because he was really trying to say that, okay, he's a bad guy, you know, Robert De Niro's character, but Nick Nolte, who appears to the appearance of respectability, is actually the one who's 10 times worse, you know, than Max Cady. And to me, that was a really interesting idea, and he played it rather well. And the original film was very melodramatic. You know, it was very black and white, and same also with 3:10 to Yuma. But getting on to 3:10 to Yuma, that was another film I would list as one of the best movies ever made. Also, the remake, and Christian Bale, I mean, he was really quite good in that film, but the actor who really stole the show was the guy who played the villain, Ben Wade, which was played by Russell Crowe. I mean, his performance in there was just Oscar caliber. I mean, he really should have got the Oscar that year for his performance in that film. And it's interesting because they did it right. They weren't trying to make a Western. They were trying to make a drama set in a Western backdrop. You know, that's what you're supposed to do. You know, the problem that The Black Hole had, we're making a science fiction movie. No, you're making a drama with a science fiction backdrop. What they did was make a science fiction movie and forgot to have a story. You know? Whereas, you know, it was interesting is when they put together Silent Running, you know, they told the actors who were working on this, forget everything you've ever known or thought of any science fiction movie. This is not a science fiction movie, it's an anti-science fiction movie. This is a Greek tragedy set in a science fiction drop. This is a drama. You guys just happen to be astronauts instead of guys working on a fishing boat or an oil rig. But think of yourself not as astronauts, but just as regular Joes doing a job every day. You're in it for the money, you don't particularly like it, but you're killing time to make the money.
I think I can understand that.
Yeah, I think we all can understand that.
I think I've done enough factory jobs in my short-lived career. I'm not that old. But anyway, let's go to aspects about the writing, since this is Screenwriting Tips. Now, Tolkien the writer, he says he has a natural gift for writing, and he knows how to do it. Explain that.
Well, it's interesting because you look at, you know, some people just are gifted amateurs, and Tolkien was. You know, he wrote from his heart, and he knew what he wanted to see, and he just had an instinct. He had no real training as a writer, but he just had an instinctive understanding of how to tell a story. And it was interesting to me because he was actually trained as a linguist, which means words were his forte, his business. So he understood vocabulary, he understood words, and he had a great grasp of it. But you look at his writing, he breaks rules and conventions in telling a story, but he makes it work. You know, one of the rules you don't break in a story is you don't have your characters split up. You know, you have a group of characters together, you don't have them split up and have the storylines take place, you know, on different tracks. Because it's usually too confusing, and two, it usually destroys the momentum of your story, and it weakens the momentum of your main characters and your heroes. But Tolkien did it and pulled it off with flying colors. The guy just had, he's one of these guys. It's like he was channeling these stories from God up high. I mean, they were just absolutely rivetingly brilliant. And some of the detail there, like, where he draws from his own experiences, where they're in the swamps and they're the dead bodies lying everywhere in the swamps. He took that from his own experience fighting as a soldier in World War I, where he was in the swamps after a battle, and there were dead bodies lying all through the swamps. And they looked alive, but they were under the water. And he said it was just absolutely chilling. But he put that experience in his story, and he just made it absolutely work. Plus, no one had ever done anything like that before.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Now I'm going to switch to a movie. I'm going to just take a line out of it, and I bet a lot of you out there can figure it out. Can you dig it? Yes, I am talking about The Warriors. You said it was a good film and one of your favorites, but not a great film.
Yeah. I'd say I would actually list it as a cult classic, but not as a classic. But to me, it was an incredibly fun film. It had a really tight plot, and it did have actual real character development and real issues in the film, but that was secondary to the action and the suspense and the momentum of the story. But I read the book actually by Sol Yorick, The Warriors, but it had all the socially relevant points about what these people's lives are like and what they go through and the choices that they make, but they don't get into near as much detail in the movie as they do the book, but all those points are there on some level. But it's there kind of in a, as you were rushing from one point from point A to point B. It's interesting because there's a scene in the book where he talks about this will never work, all the gangs uniting together into one big gang to take over, because they'll be at each other's throats. And Sol Yorick explains this in the book. And it's interesting because that same scene is in there, but it's when Cyrus is talking about uniting all the gangs. You see Cochise applauding like this half-heartedly, just shaking his head. He says he knows this is never going to work. He knows they'll kill each other. And to me, that was the genius of it. It's like they still had those points in there, but it was just in kind of a short, concise little haiku. They moved on but it was still all there. All the socially relevant points from the book to the movie, but the movie was an action film. It was an entertainment film, whereas the book was really, an art. It wasn't so much entertainment. It was more of an art book.
Right. We're going to go switch this kind of up to supporting, small parts that, John Malkovich, he's a great supporting actor. Some of the parts that he plays, you mentioned here in my notes, a part
in Alive, yeah,
in Alive, and then Russian Colonel Ice Station.
Yeah. And also Hamlet's ghost in Hamlet.
Yeah.
To me, it's interesting because I look at some of these movies or films or plays, and sometimes there's just a part in there that's, Malkovich is on screen 2 minutes at the beginning. We don't see him again for the rest of the movie. But he absolutely steals the show in those 2 minutes. He was what I remembered from the movie Alive, where he's talking about years later what he went through in the Andes, and then we go back and see what happened. And even though we don't cut back to him at the end or any other point, it was just, his performance was just so powerful. He's talking about this traumatic experience that he went through. And the fact that he was able to do it in a believable way, like you really felt like this was the guy talking about his experience, about how horrible it was. And just trying to find the words to express just, the horror of what him and the other people experienced. And